So let's talk about the nine. Do you guys have one, two, three guys that you're working with? You don't have to name names, but tell us a little bit about the nine.
I think it's the same thing that Jim says. I mean, we're looking for people who are willing to not only receive the gospel but share it. And the three main guys that I have are all in for letting Jesus be king of their life and for sharing him with others. So it's really we're reproducing, I mean, basically the same thing downstream. But I think the other key thing is, and these guys know Jesus, they love Jesus, they have been, we teach them to not just the methods and the principles and everything, but we're teaching them to love Jesus. And that's huge. If they know Jesus, then we're icing on the cake and discipling them, and we're showing them things, and they're taking it and running with it because they know Jesus.
Austin, do you have 9 right now as well?
Yes. I'm sorry, I only talked about the 3. Did you?
I was just curious. I thought you did in your last Iron on Iron, but I think I don't look at – here's the thing. I don't look at Austin's 9. I kind of let it stop there because it becomes too much to look at what would be the 27 from me. Mm-hmm. I just make sure I can see Austin's next generation of 3, which will be are part of my 9. And so I was just curious if his 3 had 3 themselves.
Yes. No, one of my 3 just moved here, so he's still getting established. So he doesn't have his 3, but the other 2 do. So, and although we say 3, like, I mean, sometimes it's even more, or maybe it's just 2, but it's that second generation.
So I have one guy right now with potentially a second one. We're just kind of working through some issues or some truths, I think. But yeah, one guy who has given his I think, like the other guys, I would, because Jim has discipled me in a specific way, I kind of do a lot of things very similar. So, like, hey, if this guy is willing to share and he's given the authority in his life to Jesus, then and he's identified that, hey, I'm willing to follow you and submit to that, then I will do the best I can as he follows Jesus to help him in that path. So there's one guy, he is reproduced and has another church that, and actually I think is in the beginning stages of discipling another guy. So
praise God.
That's pretty much, that's what from this strain. That's what Jesus has been doing so far.
Right. Now, before Justin answers, Jim, so John only has one guy. What do you think about that?
He's got one really, really good guy. Everybody should have just one guy like this guy. He's a good guy. And that's not exactly, John's not being totally honest. He has a couple other men too. They're just not nearly in the same place as this other guy. He's got a couple other guys. He just had a family over for dinner the other night where he was working with that one guy. One of the really good guys he baptized just moved and is now in another NPL work. So sometimes he's had some really good men that guys just Ethiopian eunuch on him and out of there. So I don't go down and flog John like, where's your other, you got to get the 3. We just spend a lot of our time talking about actually the good guy that he does have and how to continue to develop him as a leader.
I just want to point out one thing too, John. How many guys did you have to go through to find the one?
I was super blessed. He was okay. So maybe four other guys, but it was almost it was a God thing. Like it was super.
How many did you share the gospel with though? To get to a few in church and then from church pick, select 1 or 2.
I never keep count of that just because I feel like that would a lot.
A lot.
That's why I'll use Chuck's phrase, cheetah flips. It can be hundreds. Sometimes it can be thousands before you finally get to the one you're going to invest in. And so we never hang our head. We hold our hands up and say, thank God for the one.
Yeah, so no one's, at a 10-foot hover because a person just had one guy. We're doing cheetah flips over that one guy. So, but if you can fit three, then go for it. You're probably not going to fit 37. So there's probably a limit on this thing. So Justin, tell us about your three guys.
Yeah, I guess one key thing I'm looking for, especially working with nationals over here, is that they've got what people are calling Moses syndrome. So they're making statements like, these are my people, and I'm going to take this to my people, and taking ownership for a large segment of the population. And so those are the guys that I'm really looking for right now. And so the three right now are either saying things like that. If they're new in the work, they're saying like, hey, I'm going to take a quarter of this country, or they're already showing through kind of their efforts that they've got that kind of vision.
It would be nice if people in the U.S. were saying that about their oikos.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably something we should be looking for.
Now, I'm going to ask a good question, and I don't mean it to be it's going to sound like it's a critique. I don't intend it to be a critique, but for clarification. So we spent some time talking with Jacob and Keisha about what they saw with churches in Haiti, and the 139 being a major part of how they were establishing those churches. And as we have a 139 conversation, the question is going to come back and go, okay, how do we get to church in an American context with a 139 discussion? Because this can very quickly become disciple making, which, praise God, I'm not going to argue. We want to see people get baptized and those kind of things. But how do we, Jim, like you were saying, right? You've got your three, you're not thinking much beyond the nine. Austin, you've got two guys who have three and one who is just getting established. Where does church get into the mix of this conversation that's beyond just the leadership development that we're talking about?
The short answer to the question of how does church and A-team fit is you plan a church, or in the 139, you plan a church first. From the people that are in your church, you develop leaders. So if you think through the 4 fields framework, 139 is a leadership development tool. And it generally flows coming out of church formation. If you try to do 139 without getting to church formation first, you'll end up with, at best, a disciple-making movement. At worst, you'll just end up with really people that you call Timothy that don't call you Paul.
Yeah, it's a natural flow when you are in church together and being the church together, and then as those leaders come up and they're the ones taking what you're doing and doing it, it's really easy to identify, and then it ends up, naturally, just like Jim, it ends up naturally happening. It's not something we force. It's not something I'm trying to force on anybody. I just want to see who's going to obey and who's going to go after the lost and who's going to love Jesus with everything. And those are the guys I really spend the most time with.
Yeah, and to add to those points, if it's not coming out of your church, it just gets confusing, because now you have another elder casting vision and putting DNA into their life, and then you're trying to also cast vision, and then you'll spend most of your meeting just trying to deconflict the two. And so when they're in your church, when you're studying the word and praying and living life together, it just naturally flows into, hey, the Timothy 139 A-team relationship.
I think that one of the things that, by looking to the church for the 139, is like Jesus developing a following before he selects the 12. there's two huge mistakes that people can make is they're selecting people that don't want to be selected. And people vote with their feet. And so if they're following you, you can select out of that following. The second thing is you don't give people the opportunity to simmer. If you don't have them in church, then they don't have this high pressure of, you're my man, I'm going to pour into you. They're just in church and they're growing and they're simmering. And at the right time, oh man, Jim is my Paul. I need more, so that's the second thing. And then Jim has a third here. So
Is the other one getting a following and not building leaders? I think for me, that's the other ditch. I developed this following, or I have this church, 30, 40, 50 people, but then I don't ever select more narrowly to build into 3 or 5 or whatever you can do to raise up the next set of leaders.
If we take some of the guys that you guys are investing in of your 139, how many churches or people are they kind of representative of that's being influenced for the kingdom with the guys you're working with? It doesn't have to be exact, but just kind of a rough number. Austin, let's say you've got those 2 guys that have their 3. Just walk me through generally how those 2 guys got their 3, and do each of those 3 represent 3 separate churches? Do you have 2 in one? Do you have 3 in one church? Like, what does it look like? And the reason I'm asking the question is because when we hear this discussion on 139, our American minds start to go, well, that means that there's one church with me and 3 other guys. And then those 3 guys each have a church that have 3 guys in them. And there's no one else that's available or around. And there's just, we for some reason, we pigeonhole this idea. And I want to kind of show for you 3 guys, as you're talking, how diverse it can get with where your 139 are coming from.
Yeah, David, great question. I mean, there's other guys that have actually started churches out of our church that aren't necessarily in my 139, if you will, right now. And that's the beauty of, church and discipleship being together. I think we've separated discipleship from church, and it should never have been separated. So how you do church, you can still have guys that reproduce church that aren't necessarily the main guys you're investing in. They just want discipleship in church, and they don't want to meet outside of that, and that's okay. But the same token, I got 2 guys that are single guys that actually lead a church together. So the two of my 3 actually lead a church together because they're single. And they got a bunch of guys in their church, probably about 10 on a good day. And then they're investing in, a couple of those guys, not all of them. And it, like what Chuck said, there's room for people to simmer when you have a church. And now the other guy is married, so he's leading a church on his own. And I think it's a principle that I've started to see. It's okay to lead a church on your own, but it's really helpful to lead, either with a spouse, being married, or 2 single guys doing it together. And so there's plenty of people, in those churches that are simmering right now, that are just learning things, that don't totally see the vision yet, but are kind of hanging out, and that's okay. We're the church. Not everybody's going to be that leader, but our command is to make disciples. So that's what we want to teach everybody, and then out of that flows being the church.
No, it's good. I want to hear, and then we're going to jump down for sure, because Justin, I want to hear from you as well. But it's just helpful for people to understand that not every person is going to be an L3, nor are we expecting every single person to be an L3. Some people are just, and praise God, they're going to come to Christ, and they're going to be in our churches. They're going to be impacted for the kingdom, and they're going to be a witness for Christ. But that doesn't mean that I have to spend 2 hours a week with every single person that may or may not be in the churches that I'm a part of or affiliated with.
And I think the key is your love. Like, you love everybody. we're all believers, we're all brothers and sisters, and there's just people that are gifted, people that really want to go after it and have that passion. And you'll see those people, they'll arise. You'll see them pretty quickly, but you continue to love everybody else just the same. At the same time, though, don't lower the standards in church. Like, the goal is that we're following Jesus with everything. And I'm always looking at the three really and challenging them, and everybody else that's looking on is getting challenged as well. I should say I'm challenging everybody, but what I'm saying is mainly for those three and hoping everybody else jumps on. But, so in that process, you're going to lose some people, but some people will stick around and eventually they'll get it. We have a church like that.
One thing Jim's always said that's been helpful is to not neglect that the 2 hours we're doing HC together is some of the best discipleship anybody's ever going to get. And so as people are in that simmering spot, like Chuck was saying, they're getting more discipleship than they need at that point. And so you're trying to find the people who are wanting a little bit more, or taking everything you're doing, reproducing it, and then saying, all right, I need some more help. But yeah, the nine for me, one guy's in L2. He just planted his first house church. That's exciting. The other guy is leading a couple of them. And then the other guy, we're actually trying to rearrange time so that we can be in church together, because right now it's more of an A-team coaching relationship. But he's seeing a lot of fruit over here.
I would call all assemblies church, but the kind of church that you're talking about is the family gathering of multiple people that you're trying to get to critical mass. It's not a team, even though I'd call that church, but it is that family gathering that you're talking about. Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, Chuck, I think that is accurate. A-team is an expression of church. When 2 or 3 come together in my name, there am I with them. So when we're talking about church in this video, for our contexts, we're talking about, family, a living room size gathering of people, vice 2 or 3 people of the same gender. In fact, I think that's one of the mistakes of 139 is trying to get too many people together when you actually do your A-team meeting. It kind of loses potency. So we, as a rule, we generally say 3 or less. You and then 1 or 2 of your key leaders.